Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, AFA's Dean at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. And this is Aerospace Nation, a new conversational series examining the critical issues confronting the United States Space Force and the United States Air Force. We're really honored to have with us today General Jay Raymond, the first Chief of Space Operations, U.S. Space Force, and also the commander of U.S. Space Command. Chief, thanks so very much for taking the time to do this. We know you got an enormously busy schedule, and we're happy that you could take some time. So to start off, how about giving us an overview of your thoughts on the most critical challenges facing both the U.S. Space Force and Space Command today?
Well, first of all, thanks, Dave. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I'm sorry for running a couple minutes late, but I appreciate the opportunity. It's extraordinary times for sure. And I'm absolutely privileged to lead the sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines and space professionals in such a time. In the face of coronavirus, they continue to provide capabilities that fuel our American way of life and our American way of war. I'm very comfortable that we will continue to provide those capabilities without fail. We've implemented active measures across the force to protect our most vital resource, and that being our airmen and space professionals, so they can continue to deliver that mission, which is our second priority. And then we'll feed in wherever we can to support the whole of government and whole nation response. One of the ways we do that is by following the guidelines that we're following, again, to take care of ourselves, take care of the communities that we live in. In our operational centers, we put some pretty significant active measures in place to make sure that we can protect our ability to operate those critical systems. Everything from sequestration of certain crews to cohorting other crews to make sure that they stay separate and that we can always man those critical operation centers. It's not a one size fits all because the space units are very diverse, and they're everything from units up in Thule, Greenland, to Colorado Springs, to Denver, to on an island in the Pacific. And so we custom build those procedures to make sure that we can protect that critical mission. As General Goldfein said in last week's inaugural session, it's not business as usual. It's business as required. And we have, as we've done that risk to force, risk to mission calculus, there are some things that we have scaled back on. For example, we canceled the space flag training that was coming up to meet the guidelines and the travel restrictions. And we're going to mitigate the loss of that by doing some more local training. But clearly there has been some impact in some of our training. So we're rightly focused on the priorities of handling or participating in handling the COVID crisis. But at the same time, we haven't taken our foot off the accelerator in establishing the Space Force and U.S. Space Command. We've been provided a huge opportunity to build this service from the ground up, to start with a clean sheet of paper, not tied to how we've done business in the past, and to build a service that is purpose-built for the challenges that we face in the space domain. Under the leadership of Secretary Barrett, we are moving out and thinking very boldly. Her direction has been very clear. Don't settle. Build the service that we need, and that's what we're focused on. And I tell you, we're taking kind of a clean sheet approach in five big lines of effort that I've laid out for the team. One is an organizational line of effort. The second is a human capital line of effort, and how do you develop your people, if you will. There's an acquisition and architecture line of effort that we're working as well. We're developing the budget for a Space Force, and we're developing our own culture, which obviously takes some time. But if you give me a couple minutes, I'll just walk through a couple highlights in each one of those, and then if it's okay with you, I'll turn it back to you and then have a dialogue.
Sounds great.
On 20 December, when the National Defense Authorization Act was signed establishing the United States Space Force, we assigned 16,000 airmen assigned and active duty airmen and civilians that were part of Air Force Space Command. We assigned them to the Space Force. So the entirety of Air Force Space Command became assigned forces to the Space Force. Since that time, we've done the work to scrub the rest of the Air Force to figure out what other organizations in the Air Force that weren't part of Air Force Space Command, what other organizations were out there that also did space missions. And so we've done that work, and we've identified 23 other organizations and about 1,840 some people, airmen, that will become assigned to the Space Force. And the Secretary of the Air Force signed a memo last week directing that assignment. We've got about 180 days to effect that transition, but that's to bring unity of effort with the Space Force. We've also looked at designing the field command structure of the Space Force and really focusing on collapsing layers of command, building a light, lean, agile force that's innovative and that can go fast. On the human capital front, on that first day, we had 16,000 airmen that were assigned to the Space Force on 20 December. Got another, as I mentioned, 1,844 that will come in with the transfer of these other 23 units. Last Friday, on the 53rd anniversary of the very first Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force getting sworn in, we swore in Chief Roger Toberman to be the Senior Enlisted Advisor for the Space Force. And I'm excited that next Saturday, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday, on the 18th, when the Air Force Academy graduates, we're going to direct commission 88 cadets from the Air Force Academy directly into the United States Space Force. On the acquisition front, the National Defense Authorization Act again gave us an opportunity to develop an acquisition system, an alternative acquisition system, and focus on being able to go fast and meet the demands of the space domain. We've completed that work, and we expect to send that report to Congress here in the next few days. Architecture-wise, I think one of the benefits of having a Space Force is driving unity of effort across the department. And we've had our first architecture summit a few weeks ago. We have another session on that actually tomorrow, and I'm very convinced that we're going to generate goodness even this first year on driving unity of effort across the department. We're working our first ever budget with the Space Force as part of the budget process. Last year we had a big impact on that, influencing that budget as part of the Air Force, but this is the first year that we would do a Space Force budget. And then obviously we're doing all the culture and outreach types of things as well, like you would expect. Seals, logos, uniforms, and songs and that type of work, which will be important to our service going forward. I also need to say a special thanks to General Dave Goldfein and his wife, Dawn. They have been spectacular partners. A longtime boss of mine, got great respect. We are committed, and I think he mentioned this last week, we are committed to building the Space Force in a period of, in an environment of trust and confidence to more effective, to build a more effective joint force for our nation. And so I couldn't be happier with the partnership that we have, and I want to thank him publicly for all the great support that he's given us. And I'll tell you, it's an extremely, extremely exciting time to be in this business. I'm honored to play my part in this, and I look forward to having a dialogue with you. I hope that sets the table for some good conversation to follow.
Hey, Chief, it really does. Nice overview, and congratulations on everything that's been done so far. It's an enormous task. Those of our listeners that are out there recognize that. And, you know, people are always interested about the future. So let me start off by asking you that, and you understand this, and everyone in the space community, and hopefully those who are paying attention to national defense understand that confronting the reality of surging threats to our space architectures can only be achieved if the men and women of our Space Force are sufficiently resourced to actualize our missions. And so with a view to the future, understanding that you're focused on setting up the Space Force today, are you already thinking about plans to request an increase in overall Space Force resourcing over the future years defense plan?
Let me just say that you know, we're building this Space Force to be an agile, as I mentioned up front, an agile service that's lean, that can move fast, that can be innovative, that isn't tied to how we do business in the past. And so with that kind of as a lead-in, you mentioned in your question the threat, And it is clear that the space domain, which is so vital to our American way of life and our American way of war, is now a contested warfighting domain. It's very clear that it's a warfighting domain, just like air, land, and sea. And I think what you've seen over the last several years with the Department of Defense budget is an increase in space funding commensurate with the importance of space to our nation. So what I will not tell you is I'm going in for an increase in budget. What I'm going to tell you is I'm going to, like any other service responsible for operations in a domain, we will develop programs to be able to do the mission that our nation requires us to do in that domain. And then it will compete across the Department of Defense for funding. And if it competes well, it'll get funding. And if it doesn't, higher priorities will take place. So I'm not going into this with, we need to increase the budget. I'm going into this with, hey, we need to be agile. We need to be small. We are never going to be the size of an Army or a Navy or an Air Force. We're a very high-tech service, and we want to design it that way up front. But we also need to make sure that we have the capabilities necessary to provide our nation the information it needs from space and it relies on from space. And at the same time, and the analogy that I used is when you walk into a room and you turn the light switch on, the lights always come on. Well, we want to make sure that those capabilities that we rely on are always going to be there when you walk in the room and you turn on the switch.
Very good. Makes great sense. In your opening remarks, you talked a bit about the transition of folks in Air Force Space Command to the U.S. Space Force to capitalize on the space expertise that resides in the other services. What's the plan for bringing on those elements together to achieve a synergy of capabilities across the department? And a separate but related question, will the U.S. Air Force have a component representation at U.S. Space Command?
Yeah, so first of all, as I mentioned in my opening comments, our first step was to do a scrub internal to the Air Force. The law, the National Defense Authorization Act that established the Space Force this first year said we're going to start this out of from inside of the Air Force. So we, on day one, took the, as directed by the law, Air Force Space Command and redesignated it. And since that time, really proud of the work that's gone on in very close partnership with the Air Force to identify those 23 other units that are also do space capabilities that weren't part of the command. So we've taken that first step towards unifying the efforts of the Air Force underneath the Space Force. The department's view is that the preponderance of space capabilities across the department, including those from other services, should also be united into the Space Force. And so we are doing that same process that we've now done, that we did with the Air Force, to canvass the Army and the Navy to figure out how do we unify efforts across the department. We'll work with Congress towards that end as well. One of the things we have to be careful of, though, is that we don't break the Air Force or don't break the Army or don't break the Navy as we stand up a Space Force. We want to do it smart. We've got the right people working together to do that analysis and driving unity of effort for our country. On the second related question, you said, will the Air Force have a service component to Space Command? The answer is absolutely yes. In my Space Command hat is in my warfighting hat. Our desire is not to get into a conflict that begins or extends into space. We want to deter that from happening. But if deterrence were to fail, in my opinion, we are going to have to fight for space superiority in the future if deterrence were to fail. And to do that, that's going to require the full weight of the joint force. And so that will require Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and the Space Force to gain that space superiority. And so we'll have service components from all of those services, including the Space Force and the Air Force.
Excellent. I think that's a point that some of the folks who are just tangentially watching what's going on sometimes don't understand. And so thanks very much for that important clarification. Now, one of the original intents behind creating the Space Force was streamlining functions distributed through dozens of agencies and organizations. And as you alluded to in your comments, there also is a huge potential to achieve unity of effort in space architectures across the Department of Defense. Are there plans in place? Or again, I understand the initial actions that have to be accomplished, but in the future, is there a timeline perhaps to further integrate some of the 60+ organizations involved with national security space?
Yeah, I think, Dave, the Space Force provides us a great opportunity to do just that. And I think if we don't do that, we've missed that opportunity. So we are in the process right now of conducting the planning necessary below the Pentagon level, if you will, at the field command level, to better unify efforts across the what was part of the Air Force, now part of the Space Force. I think there's some other opportunities, and I think, as we talked about, we delivered an acquisition report that have asked for an alternative acquisition report or acquisition system. I think we'll then build, once we get that approved, we'll then build the organizational structure, if you will, to be able to capitalize on those authorities. But I think there's a great opportunity. I think there's also a great opportunity to unify efforts in architecture. You know, what does the national security space architecture look like? We all have to be rowing in the same direction. We have to go fast. We have to reduce duplication of effort, and we think there's a great opportunity.
Awesome. Well, speaking of the alternate space acquisition report to Congress, some have talked about achieving a space acquisition responsiveness like the Air Force's Big Safari. Can you share a little bit of your insights on that report? And do you see a Big Safari kind of model for Space Force?
I guess what I'd say is that the report hasn't been delivered yet. So I don't want to go into the specifics, because that wouldn't be fair to my leadership or Congress, who we owe the report to. But what I would say is, it's clear that one of the foundational components of standing up a separate Space Force was this acquisition piece, and to be able to go fast. We have adversaries that are going very, very quickly, and we need to up the pace of our acquisition. So what we've done is we pulled together a team to build this report. We canvassed all the other acquisition or organizations that have acquisition authorities as well, figuring out what authorities that they have that we would like to adopt, if you will, that work well for other organizations. And then we pulled those together and developed this new system that we've put into a report. I will not go into the specifics of the system again, but what I will tell you, it's generally designed in a way to streamline our processes, to accelerate our decision speed, to maximize our flexibility, and to increase efficiency. And I'm very pleased with how it turned out. It's a bold report, and I look forward to delivering that here in the coming days. Super.
Here's another one that kind of relates to your comments, your 5 lines of action. That's personnel. Given the stand-up of both U.S. Space Command and the Space Force and the maintenance of individual service space components, what are the kinds of personnel options out there to cover each of these organizations without having to double or even triple hat personnel in them? Now, I understand up front that's probably going to have to happen. But you know, there may be a way to increase the number of professional space personnel by increasing the number of civilians in these organizations. Or do we need a Space National Guard or a Space Force Reserve to help to meet the Space Force personnel demands?
Yeah, you know, as we build both a Space Force and a Space Command, let me just say up front, we have the billets that we need to be able to do that internal to the department. And so now it's a matter of developing people to take those jobs. I think this is another area, as I mentioned in my opening, there's kind of the 5 lines of effort. On the personnel side, we have been given a clean sheet of paper on how we want to do human capital management. I don't think we have to do it the way we've done business in the past. I think you're going to see us use a bunch of different levers in how we do this. I think you'll see an increase in use of civilians and contractors. We have the authority to direct hire folks out of industry, for example, and I'd really like to do that, get some significant industry talent to come in and be part of the Space Force as well. You know, as I over the last couple of months, I've had an opportunity to go speak at a couple of universities. Universities are seeing greater greater applications for astroengineering, for example. They're seeing a surge in people that are interested in space. I mentioned the Air Force Academy is going to have 88 graduates directly getting commissioned into the Space Force. There's a bunch of excitement here, and I'm comfortable, although it's going to take us some time, I'm comfortable we are going to get the talent that we need to be able to do this. And in fact, we're going to be able to be really selective. We're going to be a small force. We're going to be custom built to be we don't want to be big and large and bureaucratic and cumbersome. We want to be able to go fast. We're going to adopt a model like the nuclear Navy has, and we'll interview folks if they come into the Space Force. And we'll do that because we can, because of the numbers, the size that we're talking about. And so I am so excited about the opportunities that we have going forward with the numbers of people that are knocking on our door, begging to be a part of this. And I mean that. I mean, I'm getting, it's routine on a weekly, if not daily basis, folks contacting me, asking me, how do I become a part of it? And we're excited that we'll be able to build a human capital plan that will enable us to stand up this force into the force that our nation needs.
Awesome. That's really great to hear. And
one other thing I meant to I'm sorry to interrupt you. I meant to say, we advertise 40 civilian positions over the last couple months to work here on the space staff in the Pentagon. We got, I think it was over 5,700 applicants for those 40 positions.
Wow.
And our plan is to be really selective, get the best talent, and with the interest and excitement that's being generated across all the sectors of space, national security, commercial, civil, intelligence community, I'm very comfortable we're going to get the talent.
Yeah, well, that kind of ratio of slots to applicants, it's very, very clear you're going to get the very, very best. And yeah, you can sense in your response the enthusiasm that you have for taking advantage of this opportunity. Yeah, we understand that your senior space leadership recently gathered in Colorado Springs for a space-powered doctrine summit, and that a capstone space-powered doctrine document's being prepared. Can you give us a little bit of insight about this document? I know that doctrine is a deep subject, but maybe a couple of highlights and what you all are thinking about in foundational space-powered doctrine.
And so, we've had space doctrine in the past. It's been built, though, largely in a time when the domain was a benign domain. And so that doctrine needs to adjust. And having served for you back in the day in the doctrine business here on the air staff, I think you will agree that doctrine is important. And if you're going to be a separate service, one of the things I think you have to do is you have to develop your own doctrine. It was really important for the Air Forces, coming out of the Army and the work that the Air Corps Tactical School did down at Maxwell. And so what we did was we brought our best and brightest together, and it's doctrine experts, military space experts, academia, and the like, and said, let's take a stab at putting together this doctrine that is built as part of a warfighting doctrine, not just a doctrine that guided us in a benign, peaceful environment, because that's not what we need in today's environment. So we've done that. We put together a draft. It's being coordinated as we speak. And I'm excited that, hopefully that we'll be able to publish this in the next 2 or 3 months going forward. But it'll be the capstone document, if you will. And then there'll be other document volumes that will follow to that. But we're excited about the capstone document going forward, and I think we've got a good product.
Thanks for that. Turning to some current events, at the 4 March hearing with General Crozier on the Space Force Organization Plan, there was bipartisan concern over the Space Force being top-heavy with general officers. I'd like to get your take on this, recognizing that it's critical for individuals out there to understand the Space Force leadership requirements are going to be driven by pragmatic realities, the ones that you alluded to earlier, not yardsticks that might be appropriate for other service domains. You in the Space Force hold a disproportionately large leverage when one considers the effects delivered in the global reach and play. So what can you shed that might educate some of the folks out there that are perhaps spending too much time trying to compare the Space Force with the Army or the Marine Corps?
Yeah, well, so I would suggest we're not top heavy today and we're not going to be top heavy tomorrow. We're going to be about a 16,000 person force. And if we become top heavy, then we're not going to become effective. And that's the guidance that I've given to our team. In fact, when in December, after being named the Chief of Space Operations, we started digging into our current planning, and I've already directed even a further reduction from the numbers that we had. We do not want to become this big bureaucratic machine that can't go fast. Having said that, there will have to be some growth. And if you're going to be a separate service and you're going to be a member of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, you have to have an officer that serves as an operations deputy that can sit in those joint forums, if you will, and carry the space voice to those forums. If you're going to have a separate budget, you have to have a programmer, if you will, that can interact in the programming circles to make sure that the service is resourced right. If you look at any other service, there will be no comparison in the numbers of general officers that they have compared to what we have. We are making sure that we don't grow that bureaucracy. And again, it's purposeful because we want to be able to go fast.
Very good. Effective deterrence requires that our enemies have some knowledge of our capabilities and intent. National security space may be the most classified domain that we have. How do we make it easier to connect, acquire, operate, and win if it's so limited in who can actually do the work? And related, how can allies truly play in this arena when it's mostly no foreign work?
Yeah, so let me just state up front with you, I agree with your premise. We are overly classified. And as I mentioned in an earlier comment, that our desire is to deter conflict from either beginning or extending into space. To do that deterrence, you have to change the calculus of your opponent. And so, and to do that, you have to be able to talk and you have to be able to message. And so currently we are working on the strategy on what we would, on how to do that. In fact, we're having a tabletop exercise to help inform that strategy this coming week. And then I've met with the security folks from the department, and I've asked them to help us create a new security framework that allows us to implement that strategy. I'm encouraged by what I see. I think you're going to see some shifts in this overclassification. I agree with you that we're overclassified, and we need to make some adjustments, and we're working that. On the working with our partners, that's an area that's really important to us. In the past, we have not had to work. I mean, to be honest, the space was a benign domain, and partnerships weren't as critical. They're absolutely critical today, and I am very pleased by the work that we've done to develop partnerships with our Five Eyes partners, plus France, Germany, and Japan, and others. And it's partnerships linking up operation centers together. It's partnerships in putting hosted payloads on other satellites. The partnership is really paying benefits. If you look at what we did with U.S. Space Command, when we stood up that command, one of the components is called the Combined Space Force Component Command. It's a combined command with allied partners as members of it. And so it's really important work for that effort as well. Over.
Well, thanks very much, Chief. I mean, I think that's an excellent way to wrap up our session today, talking about the partnerships and moving forward in the panoply of tasks that you have accomplished and yet need to accomplish. So thank you very much for taking the time to provide your insights today. The Air Force Association and the Mitchell Institute I wish you and your staff all the best in this era of ever-increasing challenges. Have a great day.
Dave, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to tell our story. I couldn't be more excited for the opportunity. I couldn't be more excited for the advances we've already made, and we have a lot of work to do. And I'm 100% confident we've got the team to get this right. So thanks for the opportunity to have this discussion with you today.
You bet.